Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, October 14th, 2025, and our dear friend, Colonel Wilkerson, is back with us. Welcome back, Colonel.
Good to be with you, Nima. Are you stealing dear friend from the judge? I told him one time, do you have any friends that aren't dear?
I didn't know that he uses that.
My dear friend, my dear friend.
Yeah. I have to change it.
I'm not trying to impugn the judge.
No.
He's a nice guy, but he must say that to everyone.
Yeah. Larry, I want to start with the case of the Middle East. What has happened with Donald Trump's move to find some sort of solution for what's going on in the Middle East? He sent two important, persons, and in his mind, one of them was his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and the other one, Steve Witkoff. He sent them to Israel, and they were talking to the crowd, preparing to get the prisoners. And Jared Kushner came out with to me, it was so much disappointing what he said. And here is what he said to Israelis. I think he wasn't honest in his way, maybe because of his love toward the people in Israel. Here is what he said.
Be more proud to see the way that the state of Israel and its people have carried themselves through this traumatic, unthinkable, horrific experience. Instead of replicating the barbarism of the enemy, you chose to be exceptional. You chose to stand for the values that you stand for.
How can you see a genocide in Gaza and you come out with such a distorted idea that these people were somehow reasonable in their way of, attitude toward Gaza?
There are only a couple or three conclusions one can come to watching that. The first one is that Jared Kushner is the reprehensible person that several people have told me his father was. And they use the expression, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. If you know anything about Jared's father, he was a criminal par excellence in the kind of way we make white collar criminals in America. And Jared is his true son, if you will. That's one interpretation. The second one is he's the most ignorant, kept away from the truth person on the face of the earth. I suspect maybe both of those things go together. And then the third one, which probably complements those two, the second one, I have no idea to what degree it operates with him. But the third one is he is a money-loving son of a you-know-what, as is Donald Trump. They are motivated by, they live by, they counsel from their filthy lucre devotion. That defines Jared Kushner. That defines Donald Trump. It defines Donald Trump's presidencies, plural. Money is what they're after all the time. Money, filthy lucre. The comments that he made were so contrary to the truth that I think probably each one of those is operative at whichever time it needs to be. In other words, he's a scoundrel.
Here is what MSNBC reported within the Jewish community in the United States and how they feel about what has happened in Israel, in Gaza.
Believe Israel has committed war crimes. Over 60% of Jewish Americans believe Israel has committed war crimes. Jewish Americans coming to that conclusion. Almost 40% believe they have committed genocide. It's staggering. And again, the long-term implications for now, this like people on the left and on the right now who are hostile to American support of Israel. That has grown. It is no longer the extremists on both sides. That is starting to move toward the center. I mean, the long-term implications for Israel and support for Israel in the United States. So,
yeah.
And the assassination of Charlie Kirk corroborated that in spades.
Yeah.
Irreparable damage to the relationship. And as the truth comes out, such as it may, I suspect we'll never know anything about it in real terms of the truth, just as JFK's assassination is still not legitimate in terms of the interpretation of how it happened. But still, the impact is felt by people 40 and under in particular throughout the MAGA complex now. So Jared Kushner, I could have said a fourth quality, he's trying to resurrect some of that support that's fast bleeding away from Israel.
Larry, when it comes to what has happened in the mind of Donald Trump and his administration to, after all, going after such a plan to bring peace, as he's mentioned it, for 3,000 years, there was no peace in the Middle East, which nonsense after all. But he said something amazing to me when you look at the way he's talking about how all of this process, has started. He says something about Iran, which would be the key, in my opinion, to what's coming up next. And here is what he said. Then I'm gonna say my take on that, and I want to know your take and how do you understand it.
Negotiations, our reporting indicates that you were personally on the phone to get this across the finish line. What happened, and when did you know that Hamas was going to release the hostages?
Well, I'll tell you, I think it really started when we took out the nuclear capability of Iran. When you look at what they had, you couldn't have made this deal if somebody's sitting over there with a nuclear weapon over your head. And I think when we did that, and there were other obviously very warlike things that we did over the course of 4 or 5 years, if setting the table. But when we did when we took away that destructive capability from Iran.
So what's that? How can you make a connection between what has happened between the United States and Iran to what's going on in Gaza? I see no link in that direction, unless you want to make a new war with Iran. If something goes wrong in Gaza and Israel attacks again, and it's because of Iran. Let's attack.
Absolutely. Here's my surmise at the present time. And let me lead by saying Israel is not honoring this ceasefire and hasn't since the moment it started and won't throughout the duration, however short or long that is. Israel has hired thugs, much the way they hired, and the U.S. was complicit to the tune of some 30 million at least, the GHF and its security component, whose mission was, Nima, to kill 25 or 30 or more Palestinians at every one of the 4 sites that they were feeding at. And I use feeding guardedly because they weren't doing much feeding. And furthermore, in addition to the people they killed, to push them with their gunfire, which was in many cases far more than was needed to control a crowd, back into the IDF so the IDF could kill them. So I would estimate somewhere between 25 and 150 were killed at every site that GHF ran during the entire time they were feeding. That's happening right now. It's not the GSF people, although some of them could also be involved in this, the security component. It's ISIS thugs and others like them whom the U.S. and the CIA have been training and working with in places like Syria that are now infiltrating Gaza and attacking Hamas. And now you're going to get gun battles between Hamas and these people. You already have them happening in certain places. And Bibi's not continuing anything but killing Palestinians. That's what he wants to do. He's just doing it on a lower burner. Now, that's going on right now to perturbate the situation in the ceasefire, which will get out of hand so the ceasefire can be formally violated, if you will. But here's the deal, I think, that's going on, Nima. I think Witkoff is privy to this. I think Trump is fully privy to this. I know most of the coalition that's tied around Bibi Netanyahu is probably privy to it, maybe even elements of the Knesset. The plan is thus: Bibi will make sure that this ceasefire gets worse and worse and worse, and the blame is put on Hamas for that condition existing. But at the same time, Bibi is planning, and the U.S. is planning with him, to do precisely what we did a few months ago, you may recall, which was so egregiously in violation of international pacts, law, covenants, whatever you want to call them, when we lured the Iranians into the negotiations. And then with Saturday, I believe it was, of that week being the ultimate meeting where we were going to probably come to some kind of agreement, or at least we led the Iranians to believe that, we allowed Israel and helped Israel to attack Iran and murder people, including members of their families. You recall those events. All duplicitous, all conniving, and all known about by Trump. Fast forward to the attack on Qatar. Same thing. Trump knew fully what was going to happen in Qatar and did nothing to stop it, which is now why he's backfilling a lot, but he already had that planned, or his people did, to appease Qatar. What are we looking at now? We're looking at lulling the Iranians into thinking that no attack is coming, that this ceasefire is the stupendous moments to celebrate, that we have an end to the war, that Hamas is going to have some kind of outcome that might be positive from this ceasefire, though it's very difficult for anyone like you or me who's looked at this for so long to see that happening. The Arab states are pulled away a little bit from their recent blooming rapprochement with Tehran, looking back towards what might happen if this truly is a peace agreement that will last. All of this is going to be interrupted by the fact Israel's going to attack Iran in full force, out of the night, as it were, with everything they can throw at them in the way of their Air Force, which is about the only thing they can throw at them because the Israeli Defense Forces right now. And one reason this had to be done in the short term, the Israeli Defense Forces are almost broken. They are in bad shape. So Netanyahu had not only Trump on his back, but he also had the IDF leaders on his back, and he had the Israeli people on his back with regard to the hostages. So this was a very propitious, advantageous moment, politically and otherwise, for him to do this and for Trump to join him in doing it. And not for a second do I not believe, after all this perfidy Donald Trump has demonstrated, that he isn't fully cognizant of what Netanyahu is going to do. And he already has his propaganda and publicity campaign ready to go out of the can and into the airwaves to say he didn't know anything about it when Bibi becomes existentially involved with Iran in this last and fatal attack that Bibi's going to orchestrate. Regional war is going to stare us in the face, and Trump is going to put this campaign in motion, which will simply say, probably through that sycophant Hegseth, we have to go to their help. They're being destroyed. You heard what Jared said at the opening of the peace agreement, of the ceasefire, rather. You heard what he said. The IDF is beleaguered now. We've got to go to their rescue, and this campaign will just overwhelm everyone, they hope, and we'll be at war with Iran. And then we're off to the races because, as you know, I've said many times before, they are not going to defeat Iran. They're going to be confronting Iran and probably in a very serious way, Russia, and probably behind Russia will be China. So we're looking at the potential for a walk up to the war of the age. If you look back at 1914, people will talk about the automaticity of the mobilization tables. not about the beginning of the war and why it began and why people just sleepwalk into, at that point, the worst war in human history. The tables, the mobilization tables for Russia, Germany, France, and Britain were so automatic that they, in an operational sense, a tactical sense, if you will, they began to operate and push the momentum of the war to the stages that it came to. Well, that's what we have happening today, but it's orchestrated. It's not a, mobilization table that no one thought would cause this kind of thing to happen so quickly. It's actual plans. And President Trump is a part of those plans, just as Bibi Netanyahu is the implementer of those plans. And we're going to war with Iran.
Larry, how do they see Russia and China in terms of if some sort of attack happens between, the United States decides to somehow coordinate or help Israel to attack Iran? What is in their mind in terms of the reaction from Russia and China? We know that Iran is receiving, at least, these are unofficial sources, but they're reliable, in my opinion, that Iran has received many fighter jets and air defense systems. Iran is heavily preparing for a war.
From Petraeus to Kellogg to probably Hegseth and Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, for whom I have zero respect now. In fact, it's below zero. From all the people who are advising Trump in the way that he listens. I don't think that's Gabbard, for example. But from the usual sycophants, all the support is there. And I think you're going to see that blossom in this propaganda campaign that I'm talking about. And the message he's still getting, Nima, and this is your question, Russia is a paper tiger. That's the message he's still getting. And furthermore, Russia is fixated on Ukraine. It can barely, I'm quoting almost from one military officer, it can, and I had real arguments with this person, it can barely make any progress in Ukraine. It can barely handle what it has in Ukraine. How the hell is it going to handle another front in Southwest Asia? And China's too busy doing Sun Tzu. China's not going to get involved in a war that it knows is going to lead to a confrontation with the United States, wherever that might be. That's what Trump and Hegseth are being told by this brilliant bunch of sycophants they have assembled to advise them in uniform and out in their government.
We had the former head of Iranian Security Council. He was the former head of Security Council, former defense minister of Iran, the head of negotiations. Israeli, they attacked him and they destroyed his house, but he survived the attack. Yeah. His name is Ali Shamkhani. He said, Larry, something, it's in Persian. Unfortunately, I didn't find it in English to play it here for you. But he said Iran has decided after this surprise attack that has happened, after hours that Iran just controlled everything, that everything came to the control of Iranians, they have decided not to destroy and go to full out war with Israel, because the concept was to punish Israel, not more than that. Why is that? Because that was if I were in Iran, and I would say, so what is the point for that? What is the point in their mind, in your opinion? Why did they decide to punish Israel instead of going the way Israel did it?
Now, was he referring to the 12-day riposte? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I can only surmise, and I have sometimes difficulty putting myself in the Persian mind, but I can only surmise that they were fearful at that point. Some of these agreements weren't in place really ironclad at that time, like the one with Russia. They were fearful of provoking the United States into more than just the B-2s and, Fordo and Isfahan and so forth. That's all I can assume that, and that's was a reasonable fear. Don't want to have war with I think this has been a Iranian position all along. Don't want war with the United States unless it's forced upon them. And they will do whatever they can do diplomatically or otherwise to try and prevent that. And so they couldn't go too far with Israel. Clearly, the fact that it only lasted 12 days and Israel was the real, and I'm told this is the truth, Israel was the real factor. It shut down. Bibi Netanyahu was screaming, literally. That was a smart move in a tactical sense because it didn't bring the United States in other than a prima facie way. We didn't do any damage to Iran with that bombing. Trump's lying through his teeth. Now, I suspect I'm attributing lying to him when, in fact, he's been told by his sycophant advisors that we did everything, in the world. We blew up all their nuclear apparatus. We set them back 5 years, et cetera, et cetera. I know that the intelligence community is not telling him that. The professional intelligence community is telling him we didn't do very much. But he's going to put that out there politically that we did, as you showed in his remarks, that we did incredible damage to that. And that's what led to the position we're in now with the ceasefire and such. That's all bullpucky. It has no relevance to the situation at all. Why Iran didn't keep going? They didn't want to bring the United States in. This time it will be different. This time they will have had enough. But I think, the image is we don't want war with you still. They've been very adamant about that. And I think very sincerely adamant about it. They do not want war with the United States.
He said that they knew everything about the targets of the missiles. They registered everything. And at the final stages of the war, Israel was literally losing everything. That's why the United States has decided to interfere.
I don't doubt that that's true. That echoes what I'm hearing even from IDF officers, those who will talk. And by the way, what I'm hearing from them is they're sick and tired of this. They are sick and tired of this. If Netanyahu had to use ground forces against Iran, he'd have desertion rates off the charts. They are tired. They're sick of the whole business, and even some of the people who were adamantine, if you will, at the beginning, whom Netanyahu hired to replace IDF commanders who weren't so hard set on destroying everything in sight. Even some of them are having questions. And it's mainly not because they're tired of killing Palestinians. It's because they're tired of seeing their 20 and 21 and 22-year-old officers and enlisted people get blown up in front of their faces, seeing their Merkavas destroyed by this force that they're supposed to have defeated for 2 years, and they have not defeated at all. And recruits are coming in every day, and the tunnel system is largely still there, which is another issue because Netanyahu is going to insist that the IDF can stay in Gaza until it has destroyed this tunnel complex. And that's going to complicate the ceasefire as well. But the whole thing, as I said, is just a subterfuge to cover the fact that we're going to war with Iran. I hope the Iranians know that. I hope they know that. I hope they have at least an element of their leadership that is saying to the rest of the leadership, whether it be the national military, the IRGC, the Guardian Council, the Majlis, or whomever, I hope they're saying, beware. Beware of these lying, duplicitous, crooked sons of bitches. I hope someone is saying that, whispering in the ear of the Iranian elite.
He was asked by the Iranian, the guy who was interviewing him, yes, why did Russia not came to our support during the war? And he said that we didn't ask Russia for anything during the war.
I'm
He
sure they did.
confirmed what Putin said.
Yeah, I'm sure they didn't, and it was not a firm agreement at that time. And I've heard, I don't know how I would check this, I've heard that it was the Iranians that kept it from being a firm agreement, not Moscow.
Yeah.
Moscow was fully ready to commit to a
Yeah.
fairly substantial alliance, if you will.
Actually, he confirmed that as well.
Yeah.
And he said that that policy has changed.
Yeah.
Has changed.
And that's a big move for Tehran, because as you well know, Iranian history, Persian history. Russia's always been a problem, always been a problem, whether it was Stalin in the most recent years or leaders before that who coveted parts, if not all, of Iran. So it's a very dicey thing for Iranian leaders to get close to Russia.
But it has happened, and it's happening right now. They're getting closer in terms of these defense systems, offensive, defensive. They're getting, so much.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend from time to time.
Yeah. Hey, it's happening to Russia as well. What
Yep.
has happened between Russia and China, the same.
Yep.
Nobody, every time I talk with Ray McGovern, he said nobody has ever thought that Russia would be the way it is with China today. Nobody has ever thought that they're going to have such a powerful partnership as they experience it today.
And you look at these pipelines that are building right now, and you say, wow, that one's got a 35-year projection on it. That one's got a 10-year projection on it. It's not like they're thinking about falling apart anytime soon. And most of that product is going to be denominated in, and this is going to change, Nima. This is going to change the oil markets. It's going to change the oil markets. Even Saudi Arabia is going to have to consider this. It's going to be marketed in yuan, in Chinese currency.
What's your take, Larry, on the way that Donald Trump somehow, I look at the way that he was talking in Israel with the crowd, with the Knesset members. Somehow it was amazing to me how he was humiliating himself and the United States just to help Netanyahu's position in Israel. Here is what he said, what he asked for in that meeting.
Right here. These two men are good men right here. Hey, I have an idea. Mr. President, why don't you give him a pardon? Give him a pardon. By the way, that was not in the speech, as you probably know. But I happen to like this gentleman right over here, and it just seems to make so much sense. Whether we like it or not, this has been one of the greatest wartime presidents. This has been one of the greatest wartime presidents. And cigars and champagne, who the hell cares about that?
What has he achieved as a wartime, president of Israel that he admires a lot?
Nima, I have to make this remark. I have to think about it. I have to couch it in the right terms, but I have to make this remark. That was roughly equivalent to Justice Jackson, who more or less led the Nuremberg trials, putting the Nazis before the bar, as it were, standing up behind his bench, looking out across the cast and saying Hitler was one of the greatest leaders ever. And we shouldn't even be having these trials, and therefore, gavel down, I declare them ended right here. No Nazis will be tried here, none whatsoever, because that leader, Adolf Hitler, God rest his soul, in that bunker with his, Eva Braun, God rest his soul. That man was a fabulous man. That's the equivalent. And, the fact that we can't understand that in the Western media in any way, fashion, or form, but that it is becoming understood for various and sundry reasons, many of which Charlie Kirk was coming upon just as he was assassinated, the fact that it is happening is positive. I don't know if you saw the statistics yesterday, but it's just climbing a percentage point or two almost every day in terms of Americans and their distaste for Israel. I didn't think I would see this for years yet, maybe never until the destruction of the empire, but it's happening. It's happening that Israel and Netanyahu and those people you just saw in that picture and others around them in that Knesset, they are worried sick about this, and watch what they're going to try to do over the next 6 months or so in terms of billions of American taxpayer dollars coming back into us in order to try and influence this so it doesn't happen that way. This is the conundrum that confronts me every time I think about it. We give Israel billions of dollars. They use those billions to buy our politicians. They use those billions to cause wars that make the defense contractors even more rich, which they then use to bribe our politicians. This is the most incestuous state-to-state relationship that has ever existed on the face of the earth, and certainly the most incestuous that ever existed between an imperial giant and a little picayune state like Israel. It is going to be our downfall if we don't correct it. And so I'm very, very elated to see the fact that we apparently are beginning to correct it. Now, they'll fight to the tooth. They'll fight to the nails. They'll put all manner of effort into this. There won't be 250 state legislatures going over to visit Israel. There'll be thousands. There'll be whole bodies of Israelis who will descend on our education system, trying to switch this, trying to change it, trying to alter it, trying to get the momentum stopped. It'll even happen on university campuses like it happened before. But I think the young people in this country in particular are fed up with it. And I think this is going to be cast off in the next year. And Trump may be impeached successfully. And by that, I mean not just impeachment proceedings, I mean a finding of guilty and removed from office. Then we got to deal with J.D. Vance. Watch what happens with the midterms coming, Nima. If the Republican Party thinks that those midterms are going to turn against them, either in a clear majority the other way or a minority that's so substantial and Republicans deserting the party like Tom Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene and others on these key issues, they become decisive, we will have the Insurrection Act. And we will have troops all over America, and we'll have martial law. And the Republicans will try to stop that. Mark my words. And this Israel issue will be a part of that. And guess who will help Trump do that? Guess who will give him all the help he needs to do that? Just as they are giving him help right now to overthrow Maduro in Venezuela. Israel.
Here is the polls that was reported for the case of Israel on CNN, Larry.
This war caused a historic shift in public opinion on how Americans view the Middle East conflict. What are we talking about here? Who voters sympathize more with, the Israelis or the Palestinians? Back in October of 2023, it was the Israelis by 48 points. Look at this shift. Now we're talking about the Palestinians by a point. I looked back at every single poll that I could possibly find since this question was first asked in the 1980s. This is the first time ever in which the Palestinians had any sort of lead on this particular question. It is very clear that this war caused a historic shift away from the Israeli position in the Middle East conflict and towards the Palestinians when it comes to who Americans and voters sympathize with. This, of course, was led by Democrats, because what are we talking about? We went from Democrats favoring the Israelis by 26 points to the Palestinians by 46 points. That is a shift, John, quick math in my head, of over 70 percentage points. But overall, the first time ever in which more Americans sympathize with the Palestinians over the Israelis. Truly a historic shift.
And that's exactly what they're going to be deploying billions of our dollars to fight Israel. I mean, it's not going to work, though. It's not going to work. Just as assassinating Charlie Kirk didn't work.
Larry, the peace plan, how is the peace plan going to change Israeli or Netanyahu's position in the mind of those people who are trying to picture that it was a victory for Netanyahu and for Israel? What has happened?
That all gets obviated immediately when the war starts. You know, you batten down the hatches and you survive the war, and you support those who are trying to help you survive the war. War has a way of changing every dynamic you might confront, as Clausewitz points out in his book Ad Nauseam. That's what will happen, and that's what Netanyahu is counting on. That's what he's been counting on ever since October 7th. I still think Bibi had something to do with October the 7th. And I know Mearsheimer and others are right when they say that the Israelis killed as many people on October the 7th as did Hamas. I have no doubt in my mind about that. And that's the reason he doesn't want an investigation, which is another reason for him to get deeper, more broadly into war. Because he doesn't want an investigation, because the investigation will show at a minimum his negligence and at a maximum his connivance in helping October the 7th to occur. Furthermore, the tactical picture will be bitterly against the IDF, because they killed probably half of the people that were killed on October the 7th. This isn't good for Bibi anyway. The only out for him is not this ceasefire. That will, if it were to persist over time and be reasonably successful, then that would give people time to begin to think about what's happened and who made it happen. And these investigations would take place. So there's no way this astute, evil man is going to allow that kind of interregnum to occur. He's going to deepen the war. And the only way you do that is go back to war with Iran. And Trump is totally complicit, just as he was totally complicit. People who come up to me and say, well, Trump really got angry at him after he attacked Qatar, really terribly angry at him. That's what forced Trump into doing this. That's hogwash. Trump knew he was going to attack Qatar, and he went along with it. This man is as duplicitous as Bibi. He's just not nearly as smart.
Yeah. He led him to attack Iran, to assassinate, to overthrow, to do the regime change in Iran. He led them to attack. You know, he did everything. He did everything for Netanyahu. He allowed him to attack Doha.
Yes. And go back to Trump's own feat in his first administration. It was perfidious too. It was diabolical, killing Soleimani. I mean, that was, you know, I didn't start any wars, but I killed that guy, you know. Well, I'm sorry. That was a component of the war that's coming.
Larry, what he said about Adelson and in his, in his address at the Knesset in Israel, the idea of Golan Heights came from the same family, Adelson family. You know, the Jerusalem, moving the embassy to Jerusalem was the same. Who are these people? And he was, bragging about her attitude. Miriam Adelson saying, because he was asked, Donald Trump, it seems that he says that he asked her if she support who's first, Israel or the United States. He said that Miriam just hesitated to
Well, of
answer.
course. She didn't know what to say. She's not as smart as her husband. Her husband would have said right away, oh, of course, my country, because he knew the real answer was Israel. But you don't want to say that in a way that'll get televised. She had to think. These people, these people are truly, truly despicable people in every connotation of that word. From Kushner to Trump to the Adelsons, they're just despicable. And while I'm at it, Nima, you got a despicable one in your neighborhood, Machado, who says one of her first acts, if she were in power, would be to move the Venezuelan embassy to Jerusalem. What more evidence do we need to know that Israel has its fingers deeply into getting rid of Maduro?
I don't know how can someone imagine that Donald Trump would do something different from what Netanyahu is asking for, after all, because he said it. He said it all the policies coming from these people, these donors who are controlling his administration.
Look at
Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio.
Look at the calculus Trump has to use too. On this side is countless fortunes coming into my family, and that's Kushner's greatest rule. And on this side is maybe he'll kill me. Because Netanyahu wouldn't hesitate. He wouldn't hesitate to set in motion a Mossad attempt, and it probably would be successful. I hate to say it, but the Mossad and Israel are the best assassinators in the world. What was it? The term assassin, I think it was an Arabic term that actually came from the period of the First Crusade, I believe. And it was used to label those people who, when the Crusaders would move between cities, they would get hit on the flanks by these people. So they invented this term, assassin, I think it is in Arabic. I think that's it. But that's what became assassin in English. Well, the Israelis are the assassin of the modern age.
Larry, I talked with Marandi about, and I asked him, how does Iran feel about Netanyahu's message to Iran? Because Netanyahu said to the Russian president that they're not going to attack. They're not planning to attack Iran. And the Russian president came out and said, Netanyahu said this during the phone call I had with him. And the point that Marandi brought up was amazing to me, that publishing what has happened during the phone call on the part of the Russian president would put Netanyahu in a position that if he does something, he was trying to even not only betray, not only deceiving Iran, but deceiving Russian president as well. Larry, how do you see the way that China and Russia see Israel? What is Israel to their mind? What is that somehow doesn't matter for them, or they care about what Israel is doing?
When you try to answer that question, you need to broaden it all across the globe. Why do other countries covet, almost protect to the last moment, their relationship with Israel? Israel has used its influence, as it does so abundantly in the United States, not just in the United States. It's used it in Ankara. It's used it in Moscow. It's used it in Delhi. It's used it in Beijing. It's used it all over the world. And that influence has included contracts that are very lucrative for both sides, and contracts that present some of, and I have to admit this, the most talented people in the world in inventing killing mechanisms, in inventing nasty instruments of war. It really scares me when I think about Israel and AI in the same sentence. It really frightens me. I don't doubt for a moment, Nima, that there's a massive human organ cultivating and gathering operation going on in Gaza. I would bet if you dug up a lot of those dead bodies, you'd find young people in particular with organs missing. This is modern day Israel. Read Misha Glenny's book, McMafia, of several years ago, a couple of decades now. Leading the effort at global crime at that time, $5 trillion plus, was Tel Aviv, one of the leading cities in the world in terms of global crime. There's a reason for that. It's extremely lucrative. Well, it's extremely lucrative to have relations with this extremely lucrative state. Creative, ingenious, give it to them. They're better than we are, that's for sure. They're better at assassinating people. They're better at intelligence gathering. They're better at murder. They're better at slaughter. They're better at warfare, as long as they're up against innocent women and children and people that don't have much to fight them back with. These countries have relations. Turkey, for example, is still selling them oil. So are other states. So are other states contributing to the ability of Israel to continue the slaughter in Gaza. Why are they doing that, you ask yourself? They say one thing else at the UN and they do something else underneath the covers because it's so lucrative. The world works on money, and Israel is a fountain of money, or the ability to corral money. And so it's very difficult to break them away. They've done this since 1948. Very carefully, they've done this. And it's very difficult to break away from that relationship. And so on the surface, you get powerful statements at the UN and everything else, but underneath, they're still enabling the Israeli war machine because they know they want to maintain those contacts. It's very astute. We did the same sort of, we called them spider charts on Saddam Hussein, and he didn't even come anywhere close to the Israelis. But these spider charts let us know how many of the 198 roughly countries in the world where we had embassies or consulates or whatever, UN recognized states, if you will, where they were in Saddam's distribution and purchasing network. And you would be astounded at some of the countries that were selling Hussein. We didn't talk about this in the presentations of the UN for obvious reasons, but you'd be astounded at some of the countries that were selling him forbidden material, money. And you would be astounded at some of the countries we found in the AQ Khan network, the father of the Islamic atomic bomb, the man who wanted to spread the atomic bomb eventually to all the Islamic countries with whom he and Pakistan were in accord, which was quite a few. How many countries were dealing with him, selling him the miraging magnets, the centrifuges, whatever was necessary in that particular country, like North Korea, to build a nuclear weapon? These countries were NATO members in some cases, selling to North Korea because it was profitable to do so. Now, their governments, when confronted by us, when we had the courage to confront them, oh, we don't know anything about that. We'll check into that. But that's the way the world works, Nima. And Israel knows how to grease that world like no other state on earth.
Yeah. There is an article, Larry, in Financial Times. It says that the Trump administration has decided to provide Ukrainians with the intelligence, with the targets to help Ukrainian to target, to strike refineries, pipelines deep inside Russian territory. In order to, the main reason is somehow bringing, reducing the capabilities of Russia to export oil and gas. That would influence the battleground in Ukraine, and that may change eventually change the Russian mind. in their sort of negotiations with the West. They're trying to do, on the other hand, they're trying to put a lot of pressure on China and India as well. What is going on in the mind of the Trump administration? Donald Trump himself yesterday, the day before yesterday, we learned that he said he's trying to put pressure on Russia. If Russia doesn't come to the term that Donald Trump would be happy with them, he's going to send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Where are we heading in Ukraine?
Well, as I've said before, the Tomahawks, unless they're nuclear tipped, are really not that much of an enhancement of Ukraine's warfighting capability. That said, I think we're looking at a situation that I would boil down to a really, what will sound like a purely tactical remark and even cavalier in some ways. Where are they going to get the power to do any of this? You need power to do this. You need electrical power. You need energy. Russia is utterly destroying Ukraine's power system. I would say if it keeps up at the rate it's been happening in the last several weeks, remember now, we've got the terrain becoming inhospitable to armored warfare or movement, very slow because it's getting really, really muddy. They got a term for it. I can't remember it now, but it's really bad for mechanized warfare. So they've had to slow and they've had to slog, but they are doing it in a very expert and learned way. And no one probably knows this from history as well as the Russians. And their recent history taught them a lot of, modern adaptations. So what they're doing now, in addition to continuing to destroy Ukrainian forces, is destroying their infrastructure, especially their power infrastructure. So my question becomes a very tactical one. Where are you going to get the power to operate all this equipment you're sending over there, Donald? Because there isn't going to be any power. You're going to use batteries? Oh, how do you use batteries for Tomahawks? Okay, how do you use batteries for a lot of these things? Now, maybe they've invented some really capable batteries in the last few years that I'm unaware of, but I think they're going to have some trouble because there's not going to be any power. The lights are going off in Ukraine, General Kellogg, and the lights are being turned off by that paper tiger you've been telling Trump about all along. And the lights are going to go on in Odessa when Russia takes the last remaining port on the northern rim of the Black Sea. You stupid general. I'm sorry. It just is not going to happen that we reverse the situation in Ukraine, maybe with a nuclear weapon, and then we're really off to the races, aren't we? So we've got this potential at both ends of the spectrum. I didn't even talk about Bibi's readiness to use a nuclear weapon against Iran and Trump's approval of his doing so, because no question in my mind, if Bibi gets in existential circumstances and Trump is somewhat reluctant to commit the United States, as he should be par excellence, fully to that war, and Bibi says, well, I'll save your ass, I'll use a nuclear weapon, Trump would accede to it. And then, of course, deny it completely afterwards. This is what we're dealing with, Nima. We aren't dealing with necessarily sane people. We're dealing with money-hungry cretins. And that's what the empire has today. That's what we're led by. Think the Western Roman Empire. Think Caligula. Think Nero. They were better leaders than we have in the American empire today. I can't put too fine a point on that. This is a man who's contemplating using the United States military in its reserve and active components to attack his political enemies in their stronghold cities in the United States, thus provoke insurrection in those cities, and he'll get it in the south side of Chicago if he's not careful. More guns there than in a military arsenal, so he can call into effect the Insurrection Act and take real action to ensure the midterms go Republican and ensure his comment earlier. Remember, you don't have to vote anymore after this time. We'll be there. We'll be there, and Donald will have led us.
Something so
With Bibi's help. With Bibi's help. Always with Bibi's help. Need anybody assassinated, Mr. President? We'll take care of it for you.
Larry, something so strange, or maybe it's not that it's strange when you think of it, is happening in the United States and in Israel, in Europe. That is, China is coming from the background, coming to the forefront of their targets. What has happened? Bibi came out, said that what Iran is doing because of China, because China is behind all what, the attacks and the strategy, the policies of Iran in the region are backed by China. So the target would be China. The main enemy would be China. If you want to go deep, you see with the case of Charlie Kirk, Laura Loomer, one of the defenders of Israel, pro-Israelis, influencers on X, coming out and connecting the case of Charlie Kirk with China. And it's unbelievable almost when you look at it, how Charlie Kirk can be connected to China, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And you see the NATO Secretary General comes out and saying China can force or will force Russia to attack NATO. Here is what the NATO Secretary General said.
That China will force the junior partner in that relationship, being Russia, under the leadership of Vladimirovich Putin, to move against NATO here, to keep us busy. For all these reasons, we have to make sure that we work as strongly together with them. And then on the hybrid threats, this is, of course, a big worry, and we are working on it.
Nima, this coincides with something I was reading 3 a.m. this morning. I was kind of stunned by it. It was a very articulate article, and then I caught it on video, just part of it on video on YouTube. We are asserting right now, and this gentleman was, I forget what agency he was from, maybe the FBI. He was very articulate, and he was in a New England town, as I recall, a moderate-sized town, not a huge town. And he was reporting on how China had infiltrated every single aspect of their power grid. China could at any moment take complete control over the power distribution system in that complex, insinuating, of course, that they were doing it all over the country and at any moment they wanted to, simply using AI and AI-assisted infrastructure attack mechanisms. And believe me, I've been there. After 9/11, we did this analysis of how vulnerable we are to this sort of thing. Food, finance, electricity, all these infrastructures are very vulnerable. And this insinuation was it's all across the country. And the first thought I had was, who's doing this? Is it really China, or is it the United States trying to say China is doing it? That's my first indication with Ruta there too. And they're playing with extremely dangerous fire here. And they're doing it for ulterior motives, which you and I both could identify in a moment. And what they're in effect doing is bringing the world's #1 economy, the world's #1 defense industrial base in waiting, the world's #1 Navy by any stretch of the imagination, but they don't like to brag about it, into major conflict with the empire. That's what they're doing when it doesn't want to do that. It doesn't want to do that. It's extremely reluctant to do that simply because its leadership judges it's winning. It's winning peacefully, and a war would disturb that victory, maybe even terminate that victory, because they know damn well that we will use nuclear weapons when they defeat us conventionally in the first excursions of this war. They know that. They're not stupid. In fact, they are so much smarter than we are, it's pitiful. And I would say that about Putin too. I don't care how they lead their people. I don't give a damn. I'm worried about my people in my country. And the leadership we have right now are taking us down a direct road for confrontation with the #1 economy in the world, allied with Russia, allied potentially with India, and most of the rest of the world, which is beginning to hate our guts for what we're doing in it. Recipe for your own destruction? You bet. You bet. And I think a lot of this is being generated by the General Kellogg's, the Laura Loomers, nuts, the David Petraeuses, the people in the intelligence community who are on Trump's side, if you will. It's being generated by people like Mark Rutte. I don't know whether that man is so stupid. He's so stupid. I don't know whether he's complicit or he's just reading from his script. But that's what we're doing. And let me just follow up with one thing. If China were doing what we're insinuating they're doing, just 50% of it, why is it such a threat if we have done what we were saying we were doing and have spent hundreds, not tens, hundreds of billions of dollars on doing since post 9/11, protecting our infrastructure? Why would we be so damned concerned about that little thing that's happening up in New England, even if it's true that China is doing that, if we've been doing our due diligence? So we're guilty either way, whether we're making it up to generate enemies we don't need, or whether they're actually doing some of these things and we are vulnerable. We're guilty both ways. So all I can do is shrug my shoulders and say, where has the empire's leadership been for the past 30 years, except out to lunch, making money hand over foot for its 0.001%, including the defense contractors, and nothing else for the American people, period. We have been abandoned by our leadership, in other words.
Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today.
Hell of a show today, Nima. This is all getting, as I've said before, I hate for this to be happening at the end of my life. Watching my country deteriorate, fall apart, become a criminal state in front of my face is not happy time.
Yeah. By the way, great pleasure talk to you, Larry.
Back to our aloha shirts.
The topics are not that much, but talking to you is
someone from Oahu who is one of the few really true non-haole native Hawaiians, was a dear friend of my wife's. She asked me the other day, her husband just passed away. She asked me the other day, communicating a late condolence about my wife's death. She said, "I'm really sorry we ever became a state." I said, "Is that from your native point of view?" She said, "Of course, but it's now from my point of view. I'm sad to be a citizen." I said, I take your point. I take your message.
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
see you soon, Larry.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.